6 months ago, we made a decision that most chicken farmers would call crazy. We stopped buying store feed completely. No bags, no supplements, no backup plan. Just one single plant growing in our yard. And what happened next completely changed the way we raised chickens forever. Because not only did our chickens keep eating, they started eating more aggressively than ever before. Their feathers got brighter. Their movement became more active. And within weeks, something else started to happen that we did not expect. But here's the strange part. This wasn't some expensive imported solution. It wasn't a secret formula. And it definitely wasn't something you have to keep planning over and over again. This was something that grows once and keeps coming back. Year-round. No replanting. No stress. No constant spending. And yet, almost nobody is using it the right way. Because most people are stuck in a cycle. Every month, they go out and spend money on commercial feed. Prices keep going up. Quality keeps changing. And somehow, the results never seem to match the cost. Egg production drops. Growth slows down. And you start wondering if you're doing something wrong. But the truth is, it's not entirely your fault. Because what if the problem isn't how you're feeding your chickens, but what you're feeding them? That question is what led us to try something different. At first, we didn't even take it seriously. It sounded too simple, too easy, almost like one of those ideas that works in theory, but fails in reality. A plant that grows fast, high in protein, keeps regenerating, and chickens actually love eating it? It didn't make sense. But curiosity is a powerful thing. So instead of ignoring it, we decided to test it. We cleared a small portion of land. Nothing special. Just enough space to see if this idea had any real potential. No fertilizers. No complicated setup. No expensive tools. Just soil, water, and time. And within a short period, we started to notice something. The plant wasn't just growing. It was spreading. Thick. Dense. Almost like it was trying to take over the space completely. And that's when we knew this might be different. So we made the real decision. We stopped feeding commercial feed completely. No mixing. No gradual transition. Just a full switch. And honestly, the first few days were uncomfortable because the chickens reacted in a way we didn't expect. They were hesitant. They moved around it, pecked at it slowly, almost like they weren't sure if it was food or not. And for a moment, we thought we had made a mistake. Because when you remove what they're used to, there's always a period of adjustment. And during that period, everything feels uncertain. But then something shifted. It started with one chicken, then two. Then suddenly the entire flock began to eat. Not just eat, but attack it, aggressively, consistently, like it was something they had been missing all along. And that's when things got interesting. Because over the next few days, we began to observe patterns. They were no longer waiting around for feed. They were actively searching for it. They became more engaged, more alert, more energetic. And this wasn't just random behavior. Something was changing. But we didn't rush to conclusions, because early excitement can be misleading. So we kept watching, day after day. No commercial feed, no supplements, just this one plant. And then, after about 2 weeks, the first real sign appeared. It wasn't obvious at first, but if you've raised chickens long enough, you know exactly what to look for. Their feathers. They looked healthier, smoother, more vibrant, almost like they were being polished from within. And that's when we realized this might actually be working, but we still had doubts, because appearance is one thing, results are another. And the real test wasn't how they looked, it was how they performed. Would they grow properly? Would they maintain weight? Would egg production hold up? Or would everything collapse after a few weeks? We didn't know yet. And that uncertainty is what kept us going, because if this worked, it wouldn't just save money. It would completely change the way we feed chickens forever. But if it failed, we would have to start all over again. And that's a risk most people are not willing to take. But we had already crossed the line. There was no going back. So we pushed forward. And what we discovered next was something no one told us about. Because just when we thought we understood what was happening, something unexpected started to happen inside the flock. And this is where everything changed. And this is where everything started to shift in a way we didn't expect. Because up until that point, everything looked promising but still uncertain. The chickens were eating. They were active. Their feathers looked better. But none of that truly answers the real question every farmer cares about. Is it actually working, or is this just temporary? And that's when we began to notice something deeper. Not just how they looked, but how they behaved over time. The flock became more consistent. There was less aggression during feeding, less competition, less frantic movement, like they were fighting over limited food. Instead, it felt like they had access to something steady, something reliable. And that alone was different from what we were used to, because with commercial feed, there's always a pattern. You pour the feed, they rush in, they eat quickly, and then they wait, waiting for the next time you bring more. But this was different. They weren't waiting anymore. They were grazing, naturally, moving through the area, pecking when they wanted, returning when they felt like it. And that small shift changed everything. Because now, feeding was an event. It became part of their environment. And that's when the second major change started to show. Growth. Slow at first. Almost unnoticeable. But then it became clear. The younger birds began to develop faster than expected. Not dramatically overnight, but steadily. Their bodies filled out better. Their movement became stronger. Their posture improved. And this is where we started paying very close attention. Because this was no longer just about survival. This was about performance. So we compared. We looked at previous batches we had raised using commercial feed. We compared timelines. We compared size. We compared overall condition. And what we saw was surprising. They weren't just keeping up. They were matching. And in some cases, slightly outperforming. And that's when we realized something important. This plant wasn't just a replacement. It was functioning as a complete feed source. But we still weren't fully convinced. Because there was one final test left. The one that determines everything. Egg production. Because you can have healthy chickens. You can have good growth. But if egg production drops, everything falls apart. So we waited. And this part required patience. Because egg production doesn't respond instantly. It takes time. It reflects consistency. And during that waiting period, doubt started creeping back in. What if this was where it fails? What if everything we've seen so far was just leading up to a drop? What if removing commercial feed completely was too extreme? But we stayed consistent. No switching back. No mixing. No shortcuts. Just the same system every single day. And then it started. At first it was subtle. One egg, then another. Then gradually the pattern became clear. Production was stable. Not lower. Not inconsistent. Stable. And that's when we knew this wasn't a temporary effect. This was real. But what surprised us even more wasn't just the number of eggs. It was the quality. The shells felt stronger. The yolks looked richer. The overall consistency improved. And that's when everything finally clicked. Because what we were seeing wasn't just a feeding method. It was a system. A self-sustaining system. One that didn't depend on constant buying. Constant mixing. Constant adjusting. Just one source. Growing continuously. And feeding the flock naturally. But then, something happened that we didn't expect at all. And this is the part most people don't talk about. Because just when everything seemed perfect, we ran into a problem. And it almost made us quit. The growth of the plant itself became overwhelming. It spread faster than we anticipated. Thicker, denser. And if you didn't manage it properly, it started to take over the space completely. At first, this seemed like a good problem. More feed, right? But then we noticed something. If the growth became too dense, the chickens couldn't access it properly. They would only eat the top layers, leaving the lower parts untouched. And over time, that created waste, which defeats the entire purpose. So we had to adjust. We had to learn how to manage it. Not plant more, but control what was already growing. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think the goal is to grow as much as possible. But that's not the goal. The goal is accessibility. Making sure the chickens can actually use what's available. So we started trimming, rotating sections, controlling spread, keeping it at a level where it stayed productive, but manageable. And once we figured that out, everything became smooth again. No waste, no overcrowding, no inefficiency, just a clean, continuous feeding system. And that's when the financial side became impossible to ignore, because for the first time, we stopped spending. Completely, no weekly feed runs, no emergency purchases, no price fluctuations affecting us. Nothing. And when we calculated the difference, that's when it really hit us. Because the amount we used to spend in just 1 month was now staying in our pocket. And over time, that adds up fast. But even with all these benefits, there's still one thing you need to understand. The system is powerful, but only if you do it the right way. Because there are mistakes that can completely ruin your results. And most beginners make them without even realizing it. Mistakes that make the chickens ignore the feed, or slow down growth, or even stop production completely. And if you don't know what those mistakes are, you'll think the system doesn't work, when in reality, it's just being used incorrectly. And in the next part, we'll break that down completely. What this plan actually is, why it works so well, and the exact way to use it, so you never have to depend on store feed again. Because once you understand this properly, you'll never look at chicken feeding the same way again. By this point, everything had changed. What started as a simple experiment had turned into a complete shift in how we think about feeding chickens. No more guessing. No more relying on rising feed prices. No more wondering if the next bag of feed would give better results. Because now we had control. But here's the thing. If you've been watching this closely, you've probably been asking one question this whole time. What exactly is this plant? What is this thing that grows once, keeps coming back, and can completely replace store feed? And the answer is simpler than most people expect. It's not rare, it's not expensive, and it's not something hidden from the public. It's a fast-growing regenerative forage plant that thrives in warm climates, produces dense leafy growth, and is naturally rich in nutrients that chickens need. But here's why it works so well. It doesn't just grow fast. It regrows over and over again. Once it establishes itself in your soil, it becomes part of your system. You don't replant it every season. You don't restart the process. You maintain it. And that difference is everything. Because most feeding systems are built on repetition. Buy, feed, finish, repeat. But this system is built on continuity. Grow once, maintain, harvest naturally through your chickens, and it keeps going. Now here's where most people make their first mistake. They think this means they can just plant it anywhere, leave it alone, and expect perfect results. That's not how it works. Because even though this plant is resilient, it still needs structure. It still needs management. And if you ignore that, you will fail with it. The first mistake is overcrowding. When the plant becomes too dense, chickens can't access it properly. They eat the top, ignore the rest, and eventually lose interest. And once that happens, your system starts breaking down. So what you need to do is control growth, not by reducing it, but by managing it. Keep it at a level where it's always fresh, always reachable, always inviting for chickens to eat. The second mistake is impatience. A lot of people plant it and expect immediate results. But remember, this is a system, not a quick fix. In the early stages, you may need to give it time to establish, to spread, to thicken, to become self-sustaining. And once it reaches that stage, everything becomes easier. The third mistake is inconsistency. Switching back and forth between commercial feed and this method interrupts the entire process. Your chickens never fully adapt. They don't commit to the new system, and your results stay average. If you want this to work, you have to commit fully. That's what we did, and that's why we saw results. Now let's talk about the part everyone cares about. Cost. Because at the end of the day, this is what determines whether something is truly worth it. Before this, we were spending consistently. Every week or every month, money was going out. And no matter how efficient we tried to be, that cost never truly disappeared. But with this system, That cost dropped to almost zero. Not reduced, not minimized, eliminated. Because once the plant is established, your only job is to maintain it. And compared to buying feed regularly, that difference is massive. But here's something even more important than cost. Control. When you rely on store feed, you are always dependent on something outside your system. Prices change, quality changes, availability changes, and you have no control over any of it. But when your feed grows within your own space, you take that control back. You decide how it's managed. You decide how it's used. You decide how consistent it is. And that level of control is what separates average farmers from smart ones. Now let's make this practical. If you want to start this, you don't need a large farm. You don't need expensive tools. You don't need complicated knowledge. What you need is the right approach. Start small. Choose a section of land. Plant once. Let it establish. And as it grows, observe. Watch how your chickens interact with it. Adjust based on what you see. Because this is not about copying blindly. It's about understanding the system. Once you understand it, you can scale it. And that's when the real benefits start to show. More chickens, same feed source, no increase in cost. That's how you grow efficiently. But let's be clear about one thing. This is not magic. It's not a shortcut. It's a smarter way of doing what you're already doing. And like anything that works, it requires attention. It requires consistency. And it requires you to think differently. Because the biggest shift here is not the plan itself. It's the mindset, moving from dependency to self-sufficiency, from constant spending to controlled production, from reacting to problems to designing a system that avoids them completely. And once you make that shift, everything changes. Your chickens perform better, your costs drop, your stress reduces, and your entire operation becomes more stable. Now imagine this. No more worrying about feed prices rising. No more rushing to buy feed before it runs out. No more guessing whether what you're feeding is actually working. Just a system that continues day after day without interruption. That's what this gives you. And the truth is, most people will ignore this. They'll hear it, think it sounds interesting, and go right back to what they've always done. Because change feels risky, even when it's better. But the few who actually try it, who commit to it, who take the time to understand it, those are the ones who see the difference. And once they do, they never go back. So if you've been struggling with feed costs, if you've been looking for a better way, if you're tired of doing the same thing and getting average results, then this might be the shift you've been waiting for. Not something complicated, not something expensive, just something smarter. And if you want more breakdowns like this, more systems that actually work, more ways to raise livestock efficiently without wasting money, then you already know what to do. Subscribe to Herd and Harvest, because this is just the beginning. And the next thing we're going to show you might completely change how you raise your animals forever.